They saw a struggling engineer desperate to make rent. My father and his young wife slid the contract forward, thinking a $10,000 buyout would force me to surrender my mother's legacy. They had the smirking lawyer and the political power. What they did not know was that I already controlled an $86 million trust. Stick around, and I will show you how to burn a fake empire to ashes without striking a single match. Welcome back, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating and bringing you these contents. If you enjoy today's story and want to support us, please consider joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer, feature highly detailed situations, and include multiple emotional voice actors which we simply cannot publish publicly on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code right on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story, where I, Leah Cooper, am about to teach my family a lesson they will never forget. I am 34 years old and a senior structural engineer at a prestigious firm called Apex Horizon Engineering. I spend my days calculating load-bearing walls and ensuring skyscrapers do not collapse under their own weight. Yet, according to the people sitting around the dining table, my career was nothing more than a cute little hobby that barely kept a roof over my head. The air inside my father's penthouse in downtown Chicago was always suffocating. It was not a home. It was a stage set designed to project wealth and authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, while the interior was a sterile landscape of polished Italian marble, brushed steel fixtures, and cold, monochromatic artwork. This was the fortress of Richard, my biological father. He was a former judge who had recently stepped down from the bench to run for the office of mayor. The political ambition had infected his blood, rotting away whatever genuine paternal instincts he might have once harbored. He was now entirely consumed by the pursuit of power, and utterly manipulated by Evelyn, his young, new wife. Evelyn was barely 5 years older than me, but she wore her status as the matriarch of this penthouse like a heavy crown. She had orchestrated this family dinner under the guise of unity, but the moment the extravagant multi-course meal ended, the true agenda was revealed. The house staff silently cleared the fine china, and Evelyn did not offer dessert. Instead, she slid a thick, intimidating manila folder across the sprawling mahogany dining table. It stopped precisely in front of my empty plate. Beside her sat a man who did not belong at a family dinner. He was a lawyer, possessing that slick, over-groomed appearance of someone whose entire career revolved around legal bullying. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and offered me a smile that resembled a predator sizing up a very small, very weak meal. "Leah, sweetheart," Evelyn began, her tone dripping with a sickeningly artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Your father and I have been discussing the future. We have decided it is finally time to do something productive and meaningful with that old, dilapidated eyesore your mother left you." The eyesore she was referring to was a historic, classic theater located in the Arts District. It was a stunning piece of late 19th century architecture that proudly bore my late mother's name on its grand marquee. It was not just a building. It was the final, tangible piece of my mother's legacy, a place where she had poured her heart into supporting local arts. "We are completely redeveloping that specific city block," the lawyer chimed in smoothly, resting his elbows on the table. "Evelyn has a brilliant vision for a flagship luxury wellness and spa center for Morgan to manage. It will be a tremendous, highly publicized asset to your father's mayoral campaign, showing his commitment to urban renewal. All we need tonight is your signature on these documents to permanently transfer the property deed to Evelyn's holding company." Before I could even process the audacity of their demand, Morgan, Evelyn's incredibly spoiled daughter, let out a soft, mocking laugh. She sat across from me, casually swirling a glass of very expensive red wine. Beside her was her husband, Vance. Vance was a flashy real estate contractor who wore too much strong cologne and tailored suits that were just a fraction too tight. projecting an aura of sleazy overcompensation. "Come on, Leah, let us be completely realistic for a second," Vance sneered, his eyes scanning my modest, sensible work attire with obvious disdain. "You are just a clock-punching engineer at Apex Horizon. Your career is unstable at best. There is absolutely no way on earth you can afford the soaring property taxes on that crumbling brick pile, let alone fund the massive renovations it desperately needs. We are actually doing you a massive favor by taking this financial burden off your hands." Morgan leaned into Vance, her smirk widening. "Exactly. And because we are family, we are prepared to offer you $10,000 for your trouble. Think of it as a generous relocation grant. With $10,000, you could finally move out of that depressing little rented apartment of yours and maybe buy some decent clothes that do not look like they came straight from a discount hardware store." $10,000. They were offering me $10,000 to erase my mother's existence so Morgan could have a vanity project. It was a pathetic, insulting crumb tossed to someone they viewed as a desperate beggar. I ignored Morgan and Vance entirely. I looked past Evelyn's triumphant sneer and locked eyes directly with my father. I waited in the heavy silence. I waited for the former judge, the man who used to uphold justice, the man who had once sworn to love my mother, to intervene. I waited for him to defend her memory, or at least protect his own flesh and blood from this blatant extortion. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his high-backed leather chair. He cleared his throat, adjusting his heavy gold cufflinks, but he pointedly refused to meet my direct gaze. "Leah," Richard said, his voice cold and perfectly measured, adopting his political campaign tone. "You have to look at the bigger political picture here. Having a crumbling, abandoned theater attached to our family name sends the absolute wrong message to the voters of Chicago. We need to present a strong, unified front of progress. Evelyn and Morgan are trying to build something modern, successful, and highly profitable. I expect you to be reasonable and make this small personal sacrifice for the greater good of the family's public image. Just sign the papers, please, so we can all move forward." There it was, the absolute final nail in the coffin of our familial bond. He had chosen his new wife's greed and his own political vanity over his only daughter. A lesser, weaker version of me might have broken down right then and there. I might have screamed at the top of my lungs. I might have cried hot, bitter tears, flipped the heavy mahogany table, or begged my father on my knees to remember the brilliant woman he had once loved. But the truth was, all my grief and all my desperate rage had burned out into cold ash a very long time ago. What remained in my chest was nothing but cold, calculating, and absolute clarity. I did not frown. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. Instead, I let a serene, almost pitying smile slowly spread across my face. It was a smile that seemed to confuse Vance and Evelyn for a fraction of a second. I reached out and picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen the smirking lawyer had strategically placed on top of the manila folder. I pulled the thick stack of legal contracts toward me. I calmly flipped past the dense paragraphs of legal jargon straight to the final page, without a single moment of hesitation. I pressed the pen to the paper and dragged it across the dotted line. I did not write my actual name. Instead, I scribbled a messy, erratic, and completely illegible fake signature that possessed absolutely zero legal validity in any court of law in the country. "Consider it handled," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady and light. I placed the pen down with a quiet click. I stood up gracefully, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and turned my back on the entire room. I did not wait for them to inspect the document. I walked straight out of the penthouse, the heavy soundproof door clicking firmly shut behind me, sealing them inside their arrogant illusion of a flawless victory. The night air in downtown Chicago was biting and bitterly cold, but as I stepped onto the pavement, I felt nothing but a thrilling, electric rush of pure adrenaline. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The silence inside the vehicle was deafening. They honestly thought I was just a struggling, invisible engineer desperate to make my monthly rent. They truly believed they could crush my spirit and steal my mother's legacy with a $10,000 insult and a crooked lawyer. What none of them knew, what I had kept buried as my most guarded secret, was that my maternal grandmother, a ruthless and wildly successful industrialist who had always despised my father's weak character, had secretly bypassed him entirely in her will. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened a highly encrypted, secure messaging application. I typed a single decisive sentence to my private wealth manager. Initiate full unsealing protocols for the trust. I hit send. I did not even have to wait a full 60 seconds before the screen illuminated the dark cabin of my car with a reply. Confirmed. Ms. Cooper, all $86 million are now fully unsealed and at your immediate disposal. What are your initial orders? I gripped the leather steering wheel, my serene smile twisting into something undeniably dangerous in the shadows. The pawn had just quietly reached the very end of the board, and the queen was finally awake. The chess game had officially begun, and I was going to systematically take away every single thing they valued. The retaliation was swift, arriving before I even had the chance to pour my first cup of coffee on Monday morning. The atmosphere on the 9th floor of Apex Horizon Engineering had shifted drastically overnight. My colleagues, people I had mentored and worked beside for years, suddenly found the carpet incredibly fascinating as I walked past their cubicles. The usual morning greetings were replaced by an icy, deafening silence. Within 30 minutes of my arrival, my desk phone rang. It was Human Resources. The head of the department, a notoriously spineless man who always prioritized corporate politics over actual talent, was sweating profusely when I stepped into his glass-walled office. He avoided my gaze, nervously shuffling a stack of printed emails on his polished desk. He cleared his throat twice before speaking, his voice carrying the forced, artificial tone of a man delivering a scripted execution. We have received some extremely disturbing, high-level communications regarding your recent behavior, he began, finally looking up but focusing on a spot just above my left shoulder. Sources closely tied to the upcoming mayoral race have expressed grave concerns about your current mental stability. There are serious, documented allegations suggesting you possess an intent to sabotage the structural blueprints of our upcoming commercial projects out of some sort of personal vendetta. Morgan had wasted absolutely zero time. She had leveraged my father's powerful political connections, whispering toxic rumors into the ears of board members who were desperate to secure lucrative city contracts from the future mayor. She painted me as an unstable, bitter woman who was ready to bring down a skyscraper just to make a point. The human resources director folded his hands together, trying to adopt a look of deep, corporate sympathy. Given the massive liability these rumors present, we are forced to take immediate protective action, effective as of this exact moment. You are stripped of your project lead status. We are revoking your access to all engineering software and active construction sites. You are being reassigned to the basement archives as a Level 1 filing clerk until a formal psychological evaluation can be completed. It was a perfectly calculated humiliation tactic. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to cry, to beg for my job, to desperately try to clear my name against an invisible, powerful enemy. They expected me to fight a losing battle in a room designed to trap me. I did not panic. I did not offer a single word of defense or explanation, because explaining myself to a puppet was a complete waste of breath. I reached up and unclipped the heavy plastic employee identification badge from my lapel. I tossed it onto the center of his desk. It landed with a sharp final clatter that made the director physically flinch. I quit, I stated. My voice was perfectly level, devoid of any anger or sorrow. Before he could even register the shock, I turned on my heel and walked out. I did not pack up my desk. I left my coffee mug, my framed architectural prints, and my ergonomic chair behind. I walked straight down the main corridor, past the wide eyes of my former coworkers, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, severing my ties to the corporate grind forever, I did not feel defeated. I felt a massive, suffocating weight lift off my shoulders. I was finally untethered, completely free to step into the arena. At exactly 3 o'clock that same afternoon, the environment could not have been more different. I sat in the center of a sprawling, heavily fortified conference room inside a private financial security firm located in the city's most exclusive commercial tower. The walls were lined with soundproof acoustic paneling, and the floor-to-ceiling screens displayed real-time encrypted global market data. Sitting across from me was my private wealth manager, flanked by a specialized team of forensic accountants, corporate raiders, and shadow auditors. These were the ghosts of the financial world, professionals who dismantled corporations for a living, and now they answered exclusively to me. "Let us begin with the immediate threats," I instructed, leaning forward and resting my hands on the cold glass table. "The lawyer from last night, the one who brought the fake property transfer contract." My lead auditor, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet, swiped her screen, projecting a complex web of financial data onto the main display. "His name is irrelevant, but his firm's financial health is catastrophic. He has been living wildly beyond his means to maintain the illusion of elite status for clients like your father. His firm is currently drowning in toxic debt from heavily leveraged, failed commercial real estate investments. They are mathematically weeks away from filing for complete bankruptcy." A genuine, predatory smile touched my lips. The man who had looked at me like a pathetic insect was unknowingly standing on a financial trapdoor. "Do not let him go bankrupt," I commanded. "I want you to use the anonymous shell corporations attached to the trust, aggressively buy up his firm's debt from their current lenders, and simultaneously acquire exactly 51% of their controlling equity. Do it quietly. By the time he wakes up tomorrow morning, I want to be the majority shareholder. I want that man to unknowingly become my direct employee." The wealth manager nodded, already typing the execution orders into his secure terminal. "Consider it done. What is our next primary target?" I looked at the blank space on the digital board, picturing the arrogant faces of my family. "I want your team to initiate a full, scorched earth shadow audit on 2 specific entities. First, dig into every single dollar flowing through my father's mayoral campaign fund. Second, I want a microscopic review of Vance's entire construction portfolio. Look at his concrete suppliers, his safety inspection records, and his shell accounts. People who operate with that much arrogance always leave a trail of arrogant mistakes. Find the rot. Find the vulnerabilities. We are going to bleed them dry from the inside out." It took exactly 4 days for my specialized shadow auditors to completely map out the rotten, decaying labyrinth of my family's finances. When my lead forensic investigator walked into the secure, heavily shielded briefing room and projected the initial findings onto the massive digital wall, I felt a chilling, profound sense of validation. The numbers told a story of absolute moral bankruptcy. Vance was not a visionary real estate mogul. He was a spectacular, reckless fraud, playing a very dangerous game. We bypassed his carefully doctored corporate tax returns and deployed algorithms to dig straight into his supply chain logistics and hidden vendor ledgers. The data we uncovered was thoroughly damning. For his last 5 major commercial builds, including a highly publicized residential complex, he had systematically siphoned millions in high-grade materials. He quietly replaced them with dangerously substandard concrete mixtures and cheap, non-compliant steel rebar imported from blacklisted manufacturers. To get these structural death traps approved by the city, he had funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit cash bribes to 3 senior municipal safety inspectors. He was literally building houses of cards, endangering thousands of lives, and slapping premium luxury price tags on them to fund his arrogant lifestyle. But even with the massive influx of stolen construction funds, Vance was bleeding cash at an uncontrollable, catastrophic rate. Maintaining the aggressive illusion of extreme, boundless wealth for a demanding woman like Morgan was an unbelievably expensive full-time job. Between the custom designer wardrobes flown in from overseas, the exotic luxury car leases swapped out every 6 months, and the spontaneous, highly photographed trips to private islands, Vance had rapidly backed himself into a massive, suffocating corner. To keep the glittering charade alive, he had bypassed traditional, regulated banking institutions entirely. Regular banks would have audited his projects and seen right through his fabricated collateral in a matter of days. Instead, out of pure desperation, he took out a highly volatile, predatory loan of $15 million from a ruthless underground financial syndicate operating out of the industrial district. This was not a regular lending institution with customer service representatives. They were corporate scavengers. They were apex predators in the shadow economy who specialized in swallowing vulnerable businesses whole the exact moment a single payment was missed. And Vance, in his infinite arrogance, had missed his last 3 consecutive monthly payments. The syndicate was already drafting the aggressive foreclosure papers, but the true masterpiece of this financial disaster, the unbelievable, sickening twist that made me actually laugh out loud in the sterile silence of the conference room, was discovering exactly how the massive loan was secured. Vance absolutely did not have the legitimate assets to back a $15 million note. So, he went begging to the one man who had absolutely everything to lose if the family's glossy, perfect image shattered. My father, the front-runner mayoral candidate, the loud champion of civic integrity. The meticulous financial trail my team uncovered showed that my father, the former judge who used to hand down harsh, unforgiving sentences to petty thieves, had quietly and illegally embezzled over $4 million from his own political campaign war chest to cover Vance's initial operational shortfalls. He had betrayed his own donors to protect a fraud. But when that stolen money was still not enough to satisfy the aggressive demands of the underground syndicate, my father committed the ultimate, fatal act of desperation. He secretly mortgaged the sprawling Chicago penthouse, the very symbol of his power and success, placing it as the absolute ironclad collateral for Vance's toxic underground loan. They had unknowingly built a massive, interconnected financial suicide pact. My father risked federal prison just to ensure Morgan never had to wear last season's shoes, and so he could keep playing the flawless, wealthy patriarch on television. The syndicate was completely out of patience. My auditors intercepted a secure communication indicating that the shadow lenders were preparing to leak the entire explosive portfolio. They were going to hand over the proof of Vance's bribes, the campaign embezzlement, and the defaulted loan directly to the most aggressive investigative journalists in the city by the end of the current week. My father's political career, his freedom, and Vance's entire life were literally days away from complete and utter annihilation. I stood up slowly, the cool air of the room washing over me, and walked closer to the glowing projection of their impending ruin. "Do not let the syndicate go to the press," I instructed my wealth manager, my voice deadpan and devoid of any mercy. "I want you to contact them immediately through our deepest, most heavily guarded shell corporation. Offer to buy Vance's entire $15 million debt. Pay it in full, today, in pure, untraceable cash. Do whatever it takes to ensure the legal transaction is completed by tonight. And make absolutely certain my identity is buried under so many layers of offshore corporate anonymity that they will never, ever see me coming." My manager did not ask a single question. He simply nodded, his fingers flying across the encrypted terminal to issue the rapid-fire execution commands to his acquisition team. Within exactly 6 hours, the massive transfer was legally finalized. I held the digital confirmation receipt on my secured tablet, staring at the numbers. It was a strange, deeply intoxicating feeling. For my entire life, those people had looked down on me, dictating my worth, mocking my career, and dismissing my existence as a burden. But in the quiet, humming silence of that server room, the power dynamic had permanently and violently inverted, without them realizing a single thing. I had just become their sole, undisputed master. I owned the physical walls they slept in. I owned the political podium my father stood behind. I held the absolute power of their destruction right in the palm of my hand, and the time to crush them was rapidly approaching. Completely oblivious to the fact that they were dancing on the very edge of a catastrophic financial cliff, Evelyn threw herself into orchestrating the social event of the season. It was heavily billed as a monumental political fundraiser for my father. But in reality, It was a ridiculously lavish masquerade designed solely to launch Morgan's supposed luxury wellness project. The delusion was almost suffocating. They were bleeding out from every financial artery, yet they willfully decided to hemorrhage even more cash to maintain their glittering facade. The invitation arrived at my tiny, modest apartment via a uniformed private courier. It was an offensive slab of heavy, gold-embossed cardstock that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Tucked inside was a smaller, stark white note typed by Evelyn herself. It was not a welcoming gesture of family unity. The note explicitly informed me that my attendance was strictly mandatory for the campaign optics, but I was aggressively instructed to enter through the dirty alleyway service doors. I was ordered to remain completely hidden within the confines of the catering staff area until the press photographers needed a brief, heavily staged family portrait. She wanted to physically put me in my place, to make me stand among the hired servers while she paraded around in stolen wealth. What Evelyn did not know was the sheer magnitude of the panic currently consuming her husband and her son-in-law behind closed doors. Earlier that morning, I sat in my secure downtown office and gave a very specific command to the slick family lawyer, the very man whose firm I now secretly owned outright. He was utterly terrified, visibly sweating through his custom designer shirt as my intimidating wealth manager stood silently over him. I forced the lawyer to personally deliver a formal, unyielding ultimatum directly to my father and Vance. The terms I dictated were brutally simple. The anonymous holding company controlling their massive debt demanded full and total repayment of the $15 million by exactly 9 o'clock on the night of the gala. No extensions, no negotiations, no political favors. If the funds were not completely wired by 9 o'clock, the aggressive foreclosure on the penthouse would trigger instantly, and the highly damaging criminal dossiers would be simultaneously emailed to every major investigative news outlet in the state. According to the panicked audio surveillance transcripts my shadow team intercepted, Richard and Vance were practically hyperventilating. They had completely drained their last remaining deeply hidden financial reserves just to secure the grand ballroom at the most obscenely expensive hotel in the city. Their desperate, pathetic strategy was to use the blinding opulence of the gala to completely hypnotize new, unsuspecting political donors and private investors into writing massive checks. They were essentially planning to run a high-stakes, frantic Ponzi scheme right there on the dance floor to pay off their fatal debt before the deadline. They were frantically preparing for a party. I was meticulously preparing for an execution. I spent the entire afternoon at a highly exclusive, private fashion atelier, catering strictly to the ultra-wealthy elite. I permanently shed the sensible, muted cardigans and practical slacks of my former engineering life. In their place, a master tailor constructed a magnificent bespoke suit crafted from midnight blue Italian silk. It was a masterpiece of sharp, aggressive angles and impeccable tailoring, designed to project absolute, unapologetic authority. I paired it with sleek, understated diamond studs and a pair of impossibly sharp stilettos. When I finally looked in the full-length mirror, the struggling, exhausted woman who used to desperately worry about her monthly rent was completely gone. Staring back was an $86 million apex predator, armed to the teeth and completely devoid of mercy. I looked exactly like the kind of untouchable person who could casually buy and sell my father's entire existence before finishing a morning espresso. The final piece of the puzzle required absolute, military-grade precision. I did not just want to bankrupt these people. I wanted to see them held legally and publicly accountable for the innocent lives they had endangered and the civic trust they had violently violated. Through my high-level financial security team, I handed over the undeniable, airtight digital proof of Vance's structural fraud, his municipal bribes, and my father's campaign embezzlement directly to a specialized federal task force. I coordinated the entire operation directly with the lead investigator of the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the local undercover police captain. We established a synchronized, unalterable timeline. They would have their heavily armed tactical units positioned discreetly around the hotel perimeter, waiting silently in the shadows. I handed the captain a secure communication device and delivered one single, absolutely non-negotiable instruction. No matter what arrogant speech is being given on that stage, no matter who is raising a crystal glass in a toast, you will violently breach those grand ballroom doors and initiate the mass arrests the exact second the clock strikes 9. The grand ballroom of the Saint. Regis Hotel was a blinding ocean of crystal chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and flowing vintage champagne. It was the absolute pinnacle of Chicago high society. A glittering room packed shoulder to shoulder with billionaires, political power brokers, and desperate social climbers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive French perfume and the desperate, invisible stench of my family trying to con their way out of total ruin. I did not walk toward the damp, garbage-lined alleyway where Evelyn had commanded me to enter. I walked directly up the plush crimson carpet rolled out at the main entrance. The towering security guards, dressed in immaculate black tuxedos, immediately stepped forward to block my path. Holding up their hands, they had a strict guest list, and my name was intentionally omitted from the VIP section. I did not argue. I calmly reached into my designer clutch, retrieved a solid, banded stack of crisp $100 bills, and pressed exactly $2,000 into the palm of the head of security. "I am the guest of honor," I said smoothly, my eyes locking onto his, "and I am using the front door." He looked at the cash, swallowed hard, and swiftly unhooked the velvet rope. The moment I pushed through the massive, gilded double doors and stepped into the ballroom, the atmospheric pressure of the entire room seemed to permanently alter. I did not slink along the walls. I strode directly into the dead center of the VIP section, the sharp click of my stilettos cutting through the low hum of classical string music. My bespoke midnight blue silk suit caught the light, radiating an aura of dangerous, untouchable authority. My father was the first to see me. He was standing near the ice sculpture, enthusiastically shaking hands with a prominent hedge fund manager. When his eyes landed on me, the politician's plastic smile instantly melted right off his face. His jaw went completely slack, and the crystal champagne flute in his hand tilted, spilling expensive liquor onto his highly polished shoes. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost, a terrifying, incredibly wealthy ghost. A few feet away, Evelyn abruptly stopped mid-sentence. She was surrounded by the wives of city councilmen, but all the color rapidly drained from her heavily contoured cheeks. She glared at me, her eyes darting frantically toward the service doors, completely unable to comprehend why the pathetic, unemployed stepdaughter she wanted to hide was currently commanding the attention of the wealthiest people in the room. But Morgan, entirely drunk on her own fabricated importance, completely missed the paralyzing terror gripping her parents. She was already standing behind the sleek, transparent podium on the main stage, basking in the blinding glow of the press cameras. She tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback instantly drawing the attention of all 500 guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed donors, and visionary investors," Morgan projected, her voice dripping with artificial, saccharine sweetness. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating my father's glorious path to the mayor's office. We are celebrating the future of urban renewal. But true leadership begins at home, with family." She paused dramatically, scanning the crowd until her eyes locked onto mine. A cruel, triumphant smirk stretched across her face. "My dear stepsister, Leah, is here with us tonight," Morgan announced loudly, projecting her voice to ensure every single person in the massive room could hear her. Leah recently experienced a rather tragic setback and lost her engineering job due to some unfortunate personal struggles. But as a family, we believe in charity. That is why, as the director of this magnificent new wellness center, I am so incredibly proud to publicly offer Leah a position. Leah, we have secured a place for you on our overnight janitorial staff. We know you will do a wonderful job keeping the floors clean while we build the future." A ripple of awkward, condescending laughter echoed through the ballroom. The wealthy elite turned to stare at me, their faces painted with varying degrees of pity and cruel amusement. Evelyn let out a high-pitched, triumphant giggle. My father wiped the sweat from his forehead, attempting to force a chuckle to play along with the brutal public humiliation. I did not look away, and I absolutely did not flinch. I slowly raised my left arm and stared directly at the face of my diamond-encrusted watch. The second hand ticked forward. 8:59 and 58 seconds. 8:59 and 59 seconds. 9 o'clock. The heavy oak and brass doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were violently thrown apart. The deafening crash echoed like a bomb detonating inside the elegant space. A swarm of men and women wearing dark, tactical windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Financial Crimes Division flooded the room in a perfectly synchronized, military-grade formation. "Cut the music right now," a senior federal agent roared through a heavy-duty megaphone, his voice completely shattering the sophisticated illusion of the gala. "Nobody moves. Nobody leaves this building." The string quartet instantly stopped playing. The sudden, suffocating silence that descended upon the ballroom was terrifying. Women screamed, glasses shattered on the marble floor. Panicked billionaires shoved each other to back away from the advancing line of heavily armed federal agents. My father rushed forward, his face flushed with panicked, self-righteous rage. "What is the absolute meaning of this outrage? I am a former judge. I am running for mayor. You have zero jurisdiction to interrupt a private political event." Before the federal agent could even respond, a figure emerged from the chaotic shadows near the entrance. It was the slick family lawyer. He was completely drenched in sweat, his expensive tie loosened, his hands trembling violently. He did not walk toward my father to offer legal counsel. He completely ignored the shouting mayoral candidate. Instead, the lawyer walked directly through the parted sea of terrified guests, holding a thick black leather portfolio. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He looked absolutely broken. "Miss Cooper," the lawyer stammered, his voice amplified by the sheer, terrified silence of the room. He physically bowed his head as he held out the leather binder. "As the sole majority owner of my firm, I am officially delivering the documents you requested. The $15 million debt has officially defaulted as of 1 minute ago. The immediate asset seizure orders, the bankruptcy filings for Vance's Corporation, and the absolute foreclosure deed to the Chicago penthouse are all fully executed. You officially own everything." The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The whispered shock ripped through the crowd like a wildfire. The high society guests stared at me in absolute, horrified awe. The woman they had just laughed at, the woman offered a job mopping floors, was the undisputed master holding the guillotine over the mayoral candidate's neck. "Speak into the microphone," I commanded the lawyer, my voice sharp and cutting like crushed glass. "Tell the investors exactly who currently holds the collateral for this entire fraudulent empire." The lawyer stumbled over to a secondary microphone stand near the edge of the stage. He gripped it with shaking hands. "The holding company aggressively enforcing the defaulted $15 million debt and the sole entity providing the financial evidence for tonight's federal raid is completely controlled by Miss Leah Cooper." The lawyer's voice echoed through the massive speakers, thick with absolute defeat. "Backed by her fully unsealed, private trust fund totaling exactly $86 million. Evelyn let out a blood-curdling shriek of absolute, primal horror. The glass she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered into 100 pieces on the stage. Morgan physically collapsed against the transparent podium, her face turning an ashen, sickly gray as the reality of my $86 million fortune completely obliterated her pathetic, lifelong delusion of social superiority. The cameras that were meant to capture their glorious rise suddenly began firing in a blinding, aggressive frenzy, immortalizing the exact second their fake empire burned to ash. With a subtle nod to my wealth manager standing by the soundboard, the final phase of the execution commenced. The massive, high-definition digital screens flanking the grand stage, which only moments ago displayed my father's glowing campaign slogans, abruptly flickered. The polished political logos were instantly replaced by heavily redacted bank statements, undeniable wire transfer logs, and high-resolution photographs of cracked, crumbling foundational pillars from Vance's residential projects. The federal agents did not wait for the stunned crowd to finish gasping. They moved swiftly up the stairs and onto the stage. The pristine illusion of the perfect, high society family violently disintegrated in front of 500 elite witnesses. Vance, sweating profusely and completely stripped of his arrogant swagger, turned on his wife like a cornered, desperate animal. "This is all your fault," Vance screamed at Morgan, his face turning a furious shade of purple as he backed away from the advancing officers. "Your endless shopping, your private jets, your pathetic need to show off to these people, you bled my accounts dry." Morgan shrieked, lunging forward and slapping Vance across the face so hard the sharp sound echoed through the paralyzed ballroom. "You were nothing but a cheap, pathetic fraud. You promised me a billionaire lifestyle. You lying coward." Their vicious, public brawl was abruptly cut short as two federal agents grabbed them by the shoulders and slammed them both face first onto the transparent acrylic podium. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping around their wrists was the most deeply satisfying sound I had ever heard. My father did not look at his screaming stepdaughter. He did not look at his arrested son-in-law. The former judge, the man who had built his entire identity on projecting unyielding authority, completely collapsed. He practically crawled across the polished marble floor toward me. He dropped heavily onto his knees, his expensive tuxedo pants soaking up the spilled champagne. He reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grasp the hem of my silk suit. "Leah, please," Richard begged, hot tears streaming down his flushed face. His voice cracked with pathetic desperation. "I am your father. We share the exact same blood. You have to stop this. Evelyn manipulated me. She poisoned my mind and made me do those terrible things. Please, I will cancel the mayoral run tomorrow. Just pay the syndicate and make these agents leave. Save our family." I looked down at the man who had coldly tried to erase my mother's existence for a political stunt just a few hours prior. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just absolute, chilling clarity. I calmly took a half step backward, violently pulling my silk trousers out of his desperate grip. "Blood is not a shield," I stated, my voice echoing clearly into the microphone the lawyer had left turned on. "It is not a valid excuse for bottomless greed, and it certainly does not grant you immunity from the consequences of your own betrayal. You chose a lifestyle built purely on lies. Now, you get to live in the reality of your choices." Near the grand exit doors, a sudden commotion broke out. Evelyn was desperately trying to push her way through the paralyzed crowd of socialites. She was frantically tearing off her massive diamond necklace and earrings, attempting to stuff them into a small velvet clutch. She was trying to abandon her ruined husband and flee before the financial snare closed around her too. She did not make it past the velvet ropes. A female investigator planted her hand firmly on Evelyn's chest, shoving her backward into the ballroom. "Get your hands off me, I am innocent!" Evelyn shrieked, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly into her face. "I had absolutely nothing to do with Vance's building projects or the campaign funds. This is my husband's debt, not mine." I walked slowly toward her, the rhythmic clicking of my heels parting the crowd and silencing her hysterics. "You are absolutely wrong, Evelyn," I said, a cold, victorious smile touching my lips. "To maintain the grand illusion of your immense wealth, you insisted on putting your name on every single holding company, and you gleefully signed joint federal tax returns with my father every single year. You are legally, financially, and criminally tethered to every single stolen dollar." The horrifying realization hit her like a physical blow. Her legs completely gave out, and she collapsed into a sobbing, ruined heap on the floor, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers gathering outside the hotel windows. The aftermath was swift and absolute. 3 years have passed since that night. Richard and Vance were both found guilty on multiple federal charges of fraud, bribery, and embezzlement. They traded their bespoke tailored suits for standard issue orange jumpsuits, facing sentences of over 15 years each in federal prison. Evelyn, drowning in insurmountable debt and massive legal fees, was forced to declare total bankruptcy and now works a minimum wage retail job just to survive. As for me, I did exactly what I promised myself I would do. I used a fraction of my grandmother's $86 million trust to completely restore my mother's historic brick theater. I redesigned the structural framework myself, reinforcing the foundation and bringing the beautiful 19th century architecture back to life. It is no longer an abandoned building. It is a thriving, fully funded, free community arts center where local children can learn, create, and dream without any financial barriers. I walk through those grand wooden doors every single morning, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and history. I am no longer just an engineer trying to survive the corporate grind. I am the sole architect of my own destiny. I learned the most valuable lesson of all true power is not about the designer clothes you wear or the titles you hold. It is about absolute financial independence, unshakable self-respect, and the quiet, lethal ability to walk away from toxic people and build a masterpiece from the ashes they left behind. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city and country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey and want to support the channel, so we can keep bringing you these incredible narratives, please consider joining our Patreon community. Over there, you will find our most exclusive, unfiltered true stories that are much longer, pack far more detail, and feature incredible emotional voice acting that we simply cannot publish publicly on YouTube. You can join our inner circle right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by clicking the link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Stay strong, and never let anyone dictate your worth.